the network of European regions using space technologies. We have today more than 100 registered participants. We will not expect that everybody will join, but I think a large part of the registered participants will join. So we have quite a large audience and a packed agenda. For those who, and among the 100 participants, I think there will be some that have not yet been in touch with NEREUS, while others know as well. Still, one word to our organization. We are the only European network connecting space and regions. And NEREUS is focused on spreading the use and understanding of space technologies for purposes in regions at the local and regional level, public policies, but also the commercial use. We work on three main axes: political dialogue, advocacy, interregional cooperation, partnerships, and outreach. One important thing is also spreading information on latest EU space policy developments, monitoring EU space policy developments, and putting them into a form that is easy to understand for our members. Our members are regions across Europe. We have currently 23 regions and 38 associate partners. And our regions stressed that they would be interested in the EU space package and also better to understand the developments and negotiations, and that led us to launch a series on the EU space package. We started last year. We bring members of the European Parliament to the floor. We bring the co-legislator, the Council to the floor, and different stakeholders that are impacted by the EU Space Act. We organize also webinars in other domains. We will have next week one on education training, and we will put you the link in the chat. Margarita Krisecki, who works with me, will moderate that one and will be glad to welcome some of you again. So we start off with today's session, and we have with us the member of European Parliament, Gori. Gori is vice chair of the ITRE and shadow rapporteur of the EU space package dossier. And we invited him to give us his views and report on the latest state of play. Unfortunately, due to travel complications, he will not be here with us immediately, but will join us later. Therefore, I start with Salvatore Pignataro. Salvatore Pignataro is space attaché in the Italian permanent representation and follows as member of the Space Working Group the negotiation in the Council. The Council is the co-legislator with the European Parliament that decides and finalizes the dossier on the EU space package. You might recall we had last year a session with the European Commission that had proposed the European space package and the European space law. And now it is in the Council and the Parliament to be further developed and decided. Salvatore, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I have the honor and the burden to opening the discussion. All right, so I mean, first of all, let me I mean, warmly thank NEREUS and yourself, Roha, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to take part in this discussion because NEREUS brings together actors that are essential for the European space system. So yeah, let me start with a short introduction of myself and with a small institutional clarification. I'm the space attaché, the permanent representation of Italy. Now is 10 years that I am in Brussels. I have an engineering background. I spent 4 years at the Commission as a seconded, and now it's 6 years I'm at the Perm Rep. So in the capacity of space attaché, I follow the negotiations of the space files in the working party on space of the Council of the European Union. And today, of course, I will not speak on behalf of the Council nor on behalf of the Presidency. I will share a few observations from the perspective of a member states, Italy in this case, actively involved in the Council discussions. So I will focus my consideration here on the European Space Act. We have 3 dossiers at the moment in the table of the Space Working Party: the European Space Act, let's say the ECF is not on the table of the working on the Space Working Party, is on the table of a horizontal group for the European Competitiveness Fund, but we follow it as in the ECF will plug in all the activities, all the current activities of space of the European Union, and then the regulation for the European Union Space Agency. But the Space Act is way longer, I would say, the most complex one. So let me focus on that, and I'll start saying that European Space Act matters, and that's for a simple reason we all know. The space sector is no longer a niche sector. Over the last decades, 3, 4 decades, it has become a strategic infrastructure for our economies, our public services, our security, and our daily life. I should say, I mean, we all know the examples: navigation, connectivity, Earth observation, weather forecast, emergency response, agriculture, transport, financial services, and you can top up on that. All these sectors increasingly depend on space-based data and space services. And at the same time, the space sector is changing very quickly. We have more satellites in orbit, more private operators, more commercial services, more launch activities, and more cross-border value chains. And this is positive, of course, but with it, it comes more risks and new regulatory questions. And the Commission, with its proposal, tries to respond to 3 main concerns related to space activities: safety, resilience, and sustainability. Let me spell a little bit out those 3 points. Safety, because orbits are becoming more congested and contested, I would say, and the risk of collision and debris is increasing. Resilience, because space infrastructures are exposed to cyber, physical, and hybrid threats. We need to protect them. And sustainability, because space activities have an environmental footprint. very specific because it's a footprint on Earth and a footprint as well in orbit. So there is the shared opinion that we need to start regulating clearly those areas. And there is also a broader political objective. The European wants to play a stronger role globally, and today international space law is still largely based on general principles, good practices, voluntary guidelines. These are important, of course, but they are not always sufficient in a much more crowded and commercial space environment. The EU has to become a standard setter, not only a rule taker. And we should say that this is particularly relevant in a global market where many of the largest actors and technology leaders are not in Europe. And we should say, do not always play by European priorities. So that's the starting political points behind the Space Act. And there is also let me complete this initial contextualization of the Space Act with what is the main legal and political justification for the proposal. It is the need to address fragmentation and internal market in the EU resulting from different national space laws and different national approaches. And this is a valid concern, but at the same time is one point that deserves caution. It is true there are different national law, but the barriers that they create internal market are not always clearly demonstrated in the documents supporting the proposal. And this might be due to the specific nature of the space sector as a market with a strong institutional presence, long development cycles, and many activities that are not purely commercial. And in several cases, those barriers may be more potential than current, but they may become more relevant as the commercial market develops further. But this is one of the reasons why the council discussion is important. We need to ensure that the legal instrument, the EU Space Act, is properly calibrated to the real problems that it intends to solve, and that's a challenge we are coping with in the country. So this was the general context. So let me briefly turn into the state of play at the council. You'll know that the Commission presented the proposal last year in June, and this was in a package with a long-term vision, the vision for the European space economy. And so the first political discussion at ministerial level took place last year at the Competitiveness Council in December 2025. And the general reaction from member states was supportive of the objectives, as I said, but many member states, and Italy is one of them, stressed the need for simplification, proportionality, and legal clarity of the text. So the first major compromise work was carried out under the Danish presidency, and the Danish text improved the flexibility, and it reorganized part of the proposal. It introduced important clarification on the scope, on national security, on third-country operators, on QTB, qualified technical bodies, meaning those bodies that can provide the technical assessment and verify the compliance of the space activities with the requirements. And Danish text also clarified a bit more the role of national authorities. I would conclude that it was a already first attempt to make the text more workable. And then the current presidency from Cyprus circulated a new compromise text on April, on end of March 2026, and this text goes further in some respects. It introduced the notion of user certification instead of the original authorization logic, further clarifies the link with the national authorization processes and with responsibilities of member states under international law. Also, it introduced some simplification on the technical details of the text. So the direction is clear. The text is moving in the direction of simplification, but the discussion is still very much open. The Council is not yet at the stage of a final compromise, and several important issues remain under examination. Let me go through very quickly through those main directions of the Council discussion. The first one is simplification. I already said that, and I will not stop saying that we need to get to a simple and clear text. The original proposal was very ambitious, very detailed. And for many delegations, the question is whether all this level of detail is really necessary in a regulation based on the internal market, but applied to a very specific sector as the space sector. So we all agree that the European framework should create clarity, not a layer of complexity. We are working on that direction. The second issue is scope. This is probably one of the most sensitive points. We need to be clear on who is covered, which activities are covered, which activities should remain outside the regulation. And this is particularly important from a national perspective for defense, national security, civil protection, sovereign activities, public missions, and dual-use system. And this can be addressed by refining the scope or indirectly, as we are trying, by adjusting the governance provisions so that we have less impact on national autonomy for institutional missions. Third issue is proportionality, and I guess this is very much important for the audience today. The same rules cannot apply in the same way to large commercial constellation, a university CubeSat, a small startup, a public Earth observation mission, or a complex dual-use asset. So regulation, in our view, must be risk-based and mission-based, otherwise we may create barriers for exactly those actors we want to support. Fourth issue is the role of our member states, and this is not an institutional preference. You know that under the international space law, states remain the sole responsible for authorizing and supervising national space activities. So therefore, many delegations are reflecting on the best way to connect those EU-level requirements with the national authorization systems, and Italy is among those delegations. And on this point, there is a debate on whether I mean, there's a debate among those concepts of authorization, certification, and compliance assessment. Let me explain better this point. The Commission proposal was built around the idea of an EU authorization framework. Now, the Cyprus text refers to user certification. We think that from a national perspective, compliance assessment might be a better definition when we think to a common EU requirements established by an EU law that are integrated into national process. So let me get back to the conclusion here.
Yes.
I mean, we have to manage is that there's a bit of tension between Article 114 of the treaty, which is the internal market legal basis, and the specific nature of the space sector. Space sector, you know, is not a normal market. It's strategic, institutional, dual use, often linked to security and defense, and strongly connected to international cooperation. market logic is relevant, but we must apply it carefully. That's why the exercise that we are trying is to test the text against concrete use cases and see what would be the effect of the text against those use cases. And all of you can help in this exercise by spelling out your specific use cases. So yeah, for regions and stakeholders, I think that the key message is that the European Space Act should be an enabling instrument that should support the growth of the European ecosystem, not discourage them. We have a specific provision, it's the light regime, but we need to clarify and calibrate it carefully, and again you can help, and the same applies to standards. We don't want to create standards if they are not necessary, and we can make best use of what we have already. So let me conclude with one simple point. Space Act is about make space activities safer, more resilient, more sustainable, and more competitive, and all those four objectives must go together. We cannot improve safety, but we can competitiveness, and we cannot support only commercial market, but not address resilience and sustainability. And so that's the challenge. We are working making the best effort to get the best balance on those sometimes diverging needs.
Points. Thank you,
Thank you.
Salvatore. That gave us a very good insight into where are you at the council and what are the crucial points. In the meantime, a member of European Parliament, Giorgio Gori, reached us. A warm welcome, MEP Gori, and we are very honored to have you with us. MEP Gori is a vice chair of the ITRE Parliament, and in his background, he is an entrepreneur and journalist and the former mayor of Bergamo, so well aware of the local and regional level. Please, Member of Parliament, Gori, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roya. Thank you. And many thanks for having me here today. It is a pleasure to participate to this info session and update you on the state of play of the EU Space Act negotiations at the parliamentary level. Let me start by reassuring you about the fact that I'm confident that we will reach a good compromise. So far, we have had 3 shadows meetings and 4 technical meetings. The cooperation is very good among all groups, a key aspect on such an important and complex piece of legislation. The shared aim is to improve the Commission's proposal by streamlining and simplifying it, while maintaining the objective of preventing the fragmentation of our internal market, with 13 national laws already in place and more on the way, and making the life of operators easier within the Union. Moreover, this regulatory framework can act as a lever to ensure that third country operators offering services in our market do so under our conditions of safety, resilience, and sustainability, ensuring a level playing field for our operators. At the same time, we don't want to hinder the continuity of existing cooperations or obstacle the EU access to space and the use of space, being aware that we are not fully independent in this sector. Let me come now to my main priorities that I will try to push throughout the negotiations. The space sector is not used to be regulated at the EU level. The existing frameworks of reference are at national or international level or established at the intergovernmental level, like the European Space Agency. The major preoccupation by the industry is, thus, the need to rely on existing and well-known standards and methodologies. This is why I have proposed that the Commission takes duly into account those existing standards or directly rely on them. In general, the volume of secondary legislation envisaged by the regulation is considerable. This creates uncertainty for the operators that will need to implement it. That is why I believe that both implementing and delegated acts will need to be ready at least 1 year before the entry into application of the regulation. Moreover, I have proposed to establish an industry board that, in cooperation with the USPA, will need to contribute to the technical assessment that the agency will need to deliver to the Commission in preparation of such delegated and implementing acts. The technical assessment will need to be ready 2 years before the entry into force of the regulation. In relation to the objective to improve and streamline the regulation, we have proposed to adapt the chapter related to resilience, linking the Space Act to the NIS2 and the CER directives that will need to be supplemented by technical and sectoral requirements for all space operators. On the environmental pillar, the Commission is empowered to produce a methodology to calculate the environmental footprint of space activities. This point is considered controversial by the industry, already applying the ESA life cycle assessment methodology. For this reason, my proposal is to ask the Commission to ensure consistency and complementarity with such methodology. Moreover, we allow companies to have the possibility to update the environmental footprint declaration if not all data are available at the time of the request for authorization of the mission. In that case, an estimate is permitted and must be updated whenever the data becomes available. Moreover, in a future assessment and review of the regulation, I propose to introduce a possibility for the Commission to establish requirements and targets necessary to ensure effective reductions in the environmental impacts of space activities, with due regard to technical feasibility and potential similar actions undertaken at international or third country level. Another important aspect is the relation with third country operators. Via the so-called equivalence decision, the Commission is empowered to recognize third country regulatory frameworks as equivalent to the one established by the Space Act following a technical assessment and provided that certain specific conditions are met. My idea is to keep this provision, supplementing it with a new condition of mutual recognition. In case of a third country committing to recognize our regulatory framework, the equivalence decision has a maximum duration of 3 years. On the relation with the international organizations, especially ESA, whenever reference is made to international organizations, we specify that for the Space Act to apply, an agreement should be in force. This is true in particular for ESA. That is why we have proposed a new version of Article 108, where we also make reference to a possible cooperation for the establishment of the Union Environmental Footprint Database, making use of the existing ESA 1. Support for the sector and to the implementation. The section on capacity building refers to the need to finance the sector's objectives without specifying the resources through which this will be achieved. In my amendments, I strengthen this section and create a clear link with the Competitiveness Fund. Moreover, I propose that the Commission issues non-binding guidelines to support the implementation of the regulation for research and education institutions, SMEs, and scale-ups. As a final point, an evaluation and review. On the evaluation and review, the Commission shall assess, among others, the technology readiness of the regulation and the competitiveness of the sector. In that exercise, the industry board must be involved. That's my view, and many thanks. and looking forward to hear the views of the other distinguished speakers.
Many thanks for your insight. And I open a first round of questions. Participants can write in the chat. We monitor the chat continuously. Their questions or comments. If you have any to a member of European Parliament, Gori, or Salvatore Pignataro, the space attaché of the Euro-Italian Perm Rep. Okay, feel free. It's really meant interactive, but you are too many. We can't give you right the floor, or I cannot see you all, so you need to write in the chat. But I don't see any questions so far. Then after we have heard the co-legislator, the European Parliament and the Council, we can move on to the stakeholder community. We have invited for this session Avvocato Mele from the north of Italy. Avvocato, please take the floor and share your views on the new space law with us. Stefano Mele is part of a group of European lawyers that joined forces to really focus on space and provide a legal support and advice for companies and actors interested. Avvocato, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today to reflect on a question that is becoming more important with every passing year. So which is the role of lawyers in space economy in particular? For a long time, space was perceived primarily as a scientific, strategic, or industrial domain, and law was often seen as something that followed innovation, useful for contracts, licensing, or compliance, but not central to the development of the sector itself. As you know, that is no longer the case, because the space economy is no longer a distant or highly specialized field. It is progressively becoming part of the critical infrastructure of our society. I mean, telecommunication, navigation, Earth observation, time services, security, defense, logistics, all these services and more depend directly or indirectly on space-based assets and services. So once we understand this, the role of lawyers in space economy changed completely, profoundly. Lawyers, in my view, are not simply asked to support the space economy after the fact. They are increasingly called upon to help shape the legal, institutional, and strategic condition under which the space economy can grow, operate, and remain trustworthy. I believe this is particularly true today for at least 4 reasons. The first one is that the space economy is moving from a fragmented legal environment to a more structured and potentially more harmonized one. For example, the legislative initiative of the European Union that the colleagues told before is fundamental for us. One of the most significant development of the sector is the move towards a new authorization, registration, and supervision framework for space activities and space services. This is not a minor regulatory adjustment. It goes to the heart of how private operators will enter, organize, and expand their activities in Europe. So for lawyers, this has immediate practical consequences. Operators will need to understand with much greater precision what falls within the scope of the new regime. The distinction between, for example, space activities and space services may sound technical, but in practice, it will affect licensing strategies, contractual allocation of responsibility, regulatory due diligence, and the structuring of commercial relationships. So there is also a second very practical issue in my view, that is the transition. As long as the legislative package remains under negotiation, companies must continue operating under existing national regime, while at the same time preparing for the future European standards. That means managing legal uncertainty in the real time. It means advising clients not only on what the law is today, but on how to prepare for what the law is likely to become tomorrow. This leads to the second major reason why lawyers matter one more than ever in this sector, the question of harmonization versus fragmentation. Until now, the European space economy has operated in a landscape marked by multiple, as I said before, national legal regimes. This has created obvious difficulties for companies operating across the borders. Different authorization system, different regulatory expectation, and different thresholds of stringency have produced competitive asymmetries, duplicative compliance costs, and legal uncertainty, especially in contracts involving multiple jurisdictions. In these respects, the move toward greater European harmonization is potentially transformative, completely transformative, in my opinion. A more coherent framework could reduce fragmentation and offer operators a more predictable legal environment, but harmonization also raises its own question. It may reduce legal complexity overall, but in my view, it may also create higher common standards for operators currently established in jurisdiction with lighter regulatory regimes. So here again, the lawyer's role is not merely to interpret the rule, it's to help businesses understand how the legal architecture of the market itself is changing and how that affects the strategy, costs, timing, and competitiveness. The third reason, in my view, is that the space economy is no longer just about access, launch, and orbit. It is increasingly about security, resilience, and control of critical infrastructure. That's why it's important to pinpoint, like the colleague told before, of the NIS Directive 2, that looks also to the space activity and the ground space activity in particular. So the security, resilience, and control of critical infrastructure, it is where the legal role becomes especially complex. Part of the sector is already subject to obligation under framework such NIS 2 in particular, and particularly where operators provide essential services linked to communication, navigation, Earth observation, or ground-based infrastructure, as I said before. A new space regulatory framework at European level, in my opinion, would not replace those obligations. It will add a further layer of security and the resilience requirements that will need to be carefully coordinated. This matters because the legal issues is not simple, in my view, one of the compliance accumulation. It is one of the coherence. When multiple regulatory layers apply to the same infrastructure, legal advice must ensure that obligations are not treated separately, when in reality the risk is systemic, it's not fragmented. This matters because the legal issues is not simple. We are also seeing the emergence of an approach that could be described as a security and resilience by design for space system. This would be broadly consistent with what other areas of the European law are already doing in adjacent sectors, namely requiring that security be embedded from the earliest stage of the design and development, ready that added later as a corrective measure, let me say. For lawyers, this has an important implication for sure. It affects procurement contracts, technology development agreements, liability allocation, internal governance, certification strategy, and blah, blah, blah. It means, just to close with the last, it means that security is no longer a downstream legal issue. It becomes an upstream legal issue built into design choices, supplier selection, and technical architecture that move also to the supply chain security that is fundamental also for the space economy and space sector. Thank you so much. You're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you, Avvocato Miele, for your insightful overview on what's the legal aspect of what we are discussing when we talk about the EU space package. And we received some questions, and I like to take one from our panelist, Gennaro Russo. SME life and growth is paramount. How will the EU reduce the administrative burden associated with certification, cybersecurity, sustainability reporting, and procurement procedures for innovative space SMEs?
This is a very good question. The SMEs is one of the most relevant part of the system in space and space economy activities, but broader is one of the most relevant sector for all the sectors again of the European Union, because at European Union level we have 99% of companies that are SMEs. So the challenge of the legislator is to find a solution, especially I agree with the colleagues, to find a specific solution for SMEs to support them on the business and not bind them with too many compliance activities that will not reach the goal and will not reach in particular the business goals of the SMEs. We are seeing this problem in the cybersecurity, for example, at European Union level and at Italian level, or let me say member states level. In cybersecurity, we have the same problem because we are looking to the big companies, the most relevant public administration, but we are not looking to the SMEs. So the question is absolutely on topic and focus on the real problem actually. And I hope that the European Union legislator will find a solution for SMEs, because actually we do not have one.
Mm-hmm. I see that member of European Parliament Gori turned on his camera. Do you like to react on the questions?
Yes, yes. My position on exemptions is quite clear. While I share the need to apply the proportionality principle, we must recognize that there is an equal strong need to ensure the safety, resilience, and sustainability of space activities independently on which actors are undertaking them. That is why we agree with a light regime based on the nature of the mission, mainly research missions and institutions. At the same time, we ask proportionate fees for smaller companies, as well as adequate support from the Commission for the implementation. As I said, we propose to have guidelines for SMEs and scale-ups.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments on these questions? Thank you.
Maybe Rohai,
Yeah.
I cannot. I mean, I cannot. I will repeat what already Honorable Gori and Avvocato Miele said. Just on the specific of the question is very general, but the specific of the Space Act, we are trying to move on those general directions to somehow preserve SMEs or smaller operator. I mean, the first, of course, is proportionality. The requirements should be based on risk and mission profiles. That's not easy to put in practice because it risks to be to turn the discussion of a legal frame into a very technical specification. So, but we are reflecting on the best way to make sure that university CubeSat are not imposed the same requirements of large constellation or critical dual-use infrastructure, while of course preserving safety and the sustainability of the activities. So we need a usable light regime. That's a second direction, and yeah, we are trying to find a way to provide lighter procedures for low risk missions and smaller operators. But, of course, this regime must be clear and predictable and easy to use. Because if it is too complex, it will not work in practice. And third point, and that was already mentioned, no duplication. I mean, where we have already a frame, a legal frame of obligations to protect from, for instance, cyber threats or physical threats to infrastructure, on where we have consolidated methods for sustainability. We do not need to duplicate. We must not duplicate them in the Space Act. And I think that the text in the Council already made progress in that direction. And for the very same reason, we need to rely on existing standards and support measures. I guess that we've been discussing I mean, principles like scope, sovereignty, and governance that we need to solve. But I guess that by the end of this process, we need to put more focus on supporting measures on to SMEs, small operators. They need guidance, templates, help desk capacity building. So we do understand that there is a need there, and I guess we will spend more time on this point.
Yeah, that's a good point, to focus on support measures for SME, to well prepare them and give them strong support structures. The next question is quite long. I will come back later. Then there is one question, and then we move on with the panelists. I understand that at least the ITRE proposal has deleted the EU space label idea for simplification reasons. Wouldn't that have been a smart way to facilitate sustainability in areas where the data basis is not yet sufficient? Why not sharing with guidelines which will be hardened later? Is there one of the panelists would like to comment?
Maybe I can I can try and say something on the perspective of the Council, or at least on the perspective of the Italian delegation on this point. Indeed, space label was cancelled also in the last compromise text, the one from Cyprus, and we were one of the delegation that asked for dropping it out, and we didn't say that the idea of space label was wrong on itself. I think we can agree that it's useful when encourage better practices before, I mean, some technical and scientific basis is mature enough for a strict mandatory rule. But it's a very, very, very delicate point. I mean, everything in the Space Act is exploring, let's say, unknown land territories. So even for the mandatory requirements, there is a question if conditions are mature enough to introduce those basic requirements. In those area of uncertainties, introducing a label that has to be then spelled out in is a criteria. There is the risk that it become a quasi-regulatory requirement without the same level of robustness as real standard. So we felt the risk, and I mean, we wouldn't oppose to a more gradual approach, but we need to understand first guidelines, develop methodology, have some pilot schemes to test the idea and voluntary best practice before introducing a complex legal frame, even on this non-binding area of the Space Act. That was the reason we suggested to drop it out, at least from this first, let's say, edition of NEU Space Act.
Mhm. Thank you. MEP Gori, yeah.
Yes, yes. I want to specify that the deletion of the EU space label is not the position of all the ITRE committee. This is a position of the rapporteur, indeed, not of all political groups. We didn't find a compromise yet on this matter, and anyway, it has been proposed by the Commission as a voluntary tool, not mandatory.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. We move on with the panelists and come back to the questions later. Now we like to hear two views really from the base, from the companies. We are very honored to welcome Professor Giacomo Cao. He is the president of the Sardinian Aerospace District and in daily contact with companies of the sector and can put us a little bit into the picture. What are their needs? Please, Professor Cao, the floor is yours. Professor Cao, he was here. Okay.
Yes, I need to start the microphone. Yes.
Ah,
Hi.
perfect.
Well, thank you very much, Roya, for this opportunity. Hello, everybody. So I will be very briefly, since I understand that time is passing very fast. So I'll be addressing really very briefly what we do as a district, as a Sardinia Aerospace District. Is that, Roya, the purpose of this brief talk? This is a company that was constituted back in October 2013. So we have passed already 10 years. And in fact, we do have also a very interesting book that, gives the opportunity to share whatever has been done in the very first 10 years so far. So we started, as I said, back in 2013 with only 15 shareholders. And right now we are 34. So a very big increase in numbers of shareholders. This is the first aspect I would like to emphasize. The second one is that the main purpose of the Sardinia Aerospace District is basically to, build an aerospace ecosystem within Sardinia. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that, the very first experiments related to the launch of satellites in the world actually was done in Sardinia back in the late in the middle of the 50s. So, you know, Italy has been the third country in the world launching a satellite. Well, all the experiments have been performed in Sardinia. Thanks to Luigi Broglio, actually. That everybody knows. So apart from that, but not necessarily disconnected to what I just said, is the fact that you know, Sardinia is a very special location. The reason is the fact that we have currently the what we call Poligono Interforze di Salto di Quirra. So it's a military site, very well known all over Europe. But the most important aspect is the fact that the Sardinia Aerospace District did sign an agreement with the Ministry of Defense, a direct agreement with the Ministry of Defense to have the opportunity to use all the military infrastructures available in Sardinia for civil purposes in the field of aerospace. So this is actually really a milestone that we achieved for the first time in 2018, for the second time in as a renewal in 2023, and this agreement will go up to 2028. Apart from that, the reason why I would say the Sardinia aerospace ecosystem is growing is related to the fact that just a month before the Sardinian Aerospace District was constituted, there was the inauguration of the Sardinian radio telescope, which, as you might know, is maybe the third best, biggest infrastructure of this type all over Europe. Let me go just to the end of this brief.
Maybe we come back later. Maybe we hear another voice because we need to move on with the other panelists.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, just go ahead. I don't know. I could stay with you up to 6. Then I have to leave.
Okay, perfect. Maybe then later we come back to
just
Sardinia.
go ahead. No problem.
Yes, we come back. We have another point of view, and welcome Gennaro Russo. Gennaro Russo is Senior Manager for the Aerospace District in Campania. Gennaro, what's your point of view when it comes to the European space package? Where do you see the needs of companies and of your sector?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Roya, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this important moment. We represent, as Campania Aerospace, this is 170 companies. I don't want to go into details, but just to give you the dimensions of the SMEs and large companies that are involved in the aeronautics and space activities in this region. We have been active on space activities since the beginning of the story, mainly on the scientific side, but then today we also have industrial activities, of course. The major elements that comes from our ecosystem is the fact that companies struggles in growing up. We are not United States, so everything is very, at least long, if not complex and complicated. And so small companies suffers quite a lot in growing up. So this is the very first important message I want to put on the table. Certainly, let's say, 1 over 1,000 will get the results, as always in our life. But everybody should do everything possible to support this 1 over 1,000 to really grow. And after all, Europe, I say something that is known very well to everybody. We are quite behind the United States in particular for what concerns the growing up of commercial space activities. That means private involvement, full involvement in space activities, any kind of activities, launch services, anything. We should find the way to support a faster growing of our companies, and particularly SMEs, towards having some champion. Because otherwise, we will be always at least followers. We will never really have the chance to let me say, compete concretely and almost at the same level with respect to other companies around the world. Of course, United States first of all. So this is the major elements, major request, major need, as our companies, let's say, says almost every day. So I stop here for the while.
Mm-hmm. So you're advocate that we have strong support structures, that the regulations are shaped in a way that they support the growth of SME, that in Europe the growth of SME and overcoming this 5-year debt valley is crucial.
Yeah. Just to make an example that everyone knows, United States decided, the government of the United States decided more than 20 years ago not to go further with governmental activities for what concerns launchers. So they decided to leave the floor to private companies, supporting them, buying services in particular, not only, but in particular. So 20 years is a long story, but we see the results. We know that the environment, European environment and United States environments are fully different from many points of view, maybe all points of view, but nevertheless, our goal should be to have sooner or later some champions on the global market.
On the European champions.
Yeah.
Good. Gennaro had also one question to the panelists, and maybe we close your intervention with this question. What actions will Europe take to become not only a regulator and funder, but also a strategic customer for European space services and technologies, so to support the born of champion competitive with already existing entities? For example, SpaceX, if you want to react.
In this case, I would say that is a matter of money, of investment, and I want to mention the fact that actually the Commission proposed into the framework of the Competitiveness Fund a big amount of investment for space and defense. The two matter are gathered in the same chapter, and the proposal is for an allocation of 130 billion for the next MFF 2028 to 2034. In addition to that, we remember that on the interministerial meeting that that happened in Brema in last November or December, I don't remember. November. The minister of the countries that are part of ESA decided a quite strong amount of investment for the ESA new projects. And so the general picture is of the size investment by the European Union and by the country, the state member too. Probably we are not at the level of our competitors, American and Chinese, but respect to the past, I see a better solution for us.
Yeah, I fully agree with Giorgio Gori. In the last ESA Council that was in November in Bremen, last November 2025, ESA had a record a subscription of member states into space programs. The member states almost accepted everything that the ESA had proposed. It has the largest budget subscribed in the history of ESA.
Exactly.
And if I may comment on this question, I mean this is the key questions I believe for the European space policy, and of course here I do express my personal view of it. I mean we talk about regulation, the Space Act, and that's needed, but the regulation alone will not create European champions. Funding it's crucial, and as Honorable Gori said, that's a very promising. I think that we need also to make sure that this funding make a better condition for the European market. And one of the tools is that, as it happened for other spacefaring nation, Europe needs to act as a strategic customer, a predictable and long-term buyer of European space services and technologies. That's very much needed. This means using public demand more, how I should say it, intelligently. I mean, already, EU program member states, regional authorities, public agencies already need communication, Earth observation, navigation, launch services, and whatever, SSA, connectivity. And to me, this needs, there is still room to better connect all those needs and aggregate them where possible and translate it into a stable demands for European providers. And it was said security and defense needs by Honorable Gori. Security and defense needs can also play an important role. They can, of course, generate demand and accelerate innovation, support markets. But provided that we can create synergies between the civil security and defense requirements before, not duplicating and not overlapping that, and neither closing market unnecessarily. And also some smart procurement tool is essential. So I guess that we have very good ECF as far as list of activities, as far as funding potential. We may do better in injecting some smart tools to make sure that fund contribute to the objective of creating an effective space economy market in Europe.
Thank you. Now we hear the views of the companies. I like now to move on to an academic perspective. I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Nicole Viola. Professor Viola is an aerospace expert from the Politecnico of Torino. And the Politecnico di Torino had organized with the rapporteur in the European Parliament an event on the European Space Package. So they are specifically working on it. Professor Viola, I'm very interested in your view. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Roya, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. That's a pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, as Roya mentioned, we organized last December, this let's say workshop at European Parliament, and it was a very not easy, I mean, to organize it, but it was very, I think, very effective and very interesting from at least from our perspective. So it was a nice and effective debates among the, let's say, the delegates that were there, industries, representing industries, agencies, small and medium industries and companies. And we, as university, we are very much interested in this, let's say, in the space economy in general, and how this can impact the educational programs also. So the universities, what is the, let's say, the impact that all these debates on the European Space Act might have on universities? And I'm talking about technical universities. So what is the impact? Well, the impact, I think, is on 2 points. There might be 2 points of view: the education, and the research. So when it comes to education, we are a technical university, so we have all degrees in engineering. When it comes to aerospace engineering, so not talking on management specifically, but aerospace engineering, I believe that the students of the future and present students should have more skills and understanding in the low and space law domain. And this already happens for aviation, because certification are very important constraints and requirements that all students in aviation do know, and do know that they are binding for the design of new aircraft. So the same is happening and will happen. We are maybe not there yet, but we are working in this direction among our, let's say, among our departments to really have this new courses and to have these multidisciplinary courses, talking with colleagues of that are specifically working in laws and economy. Because when it comes to space economy, we need to remember that laws is a pillar, but also economy, of course, and also strategy, policy. So I believe that also very, let's say, technical domains need to have a certain understanding of these future regulations. This will drive the design of future missions and future systems. So this is very important. And last thing to mention, technical university, of course, can collaborate with institutions when it comes to, let's say, research. We know that there are 3 pillars for the Space Act: safety, resilience, and sustainability. Of course, universities, technical universities, can support institutions in developing modeling tools to, let's say, to assess all this, the compliance by industries or research centers with these new requirements. So this is the point of view.
Thank you for this academic insight. I think we might think about it in the future to organize also one session dedicated to the universities and having views of different university and how far it will impact them. Before I move on to the next speaker, there was another question by Gennaro Russo, which I find interesting. How will the European space economy strategy strengthen the role of regional ecosystem and aerospace cluster in European value chains? If one of the panelists.
I can very briefly answer to Gennaro Russo that unfortunately I believe that the communication on space economy was a very good first step, but it lacks teeth, I would say. I hope that the Commission will come up with more concrete proposals, including to strengthen the role of regional and in national and regional ecosystem and cluster, which is not the case so far.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very good and straightforward answer. Before I'd like to move on to our last panelist. It's quite interesting. I'm very honored to welcome Guillaume de Dinechin. He is a president of Astra Space Risk and Insurance Advisor. Guillaume is from the sector that insures space activities. And when preparing for this webinar, we thought it's quite important actually also to know what are their perspective on the proposed EU space package. Guillaume is an experienced space professional. He started, so he's not only an insurer, and to be an insurer, he was first a very experienced space professional. He started his career in French Guiana, had different positions in the ESA, and is now leading the space risk and insurance advisors in Europe. Please, Guillaume, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to NEREUS for providing the opportunity to address space insurance in this context. I will say space insurance is a major factor in the space industry, but it is sort of underwater, and people don't really see it. And we strongly believe that legislators need to be aware of the features of the space insurance market and ensure that regulations do not hamper the insurability of the sector. So I will speak only from a space insurance point of view. In a nutshell, space sustainability is becoming a nodal point in the space insurance market on one side, and then sustainability of the space sector is very dependent upon the viability of the space insurance market. For one simple reason, the financiers and the investors in any space venture will accept the business risk, but they will not accept the technical risk. In other words, the risk of technical failure of a satellite. So when a space operator launches a satellite or operates a satellite in orbit, they need to have insurance because otherwise they will not have the financing. Now, there are two types of insurance that are considered in the space market. The first one is damage insurance, and the second one is liability insurance. Damage insurance covers the damage suffered by the owner of the satellite. Like the satellite does not operate in accordance with its intended mission. There's a launch failure or a satellite failure in orbit or during LEOP or re-entry. The satellite failed, and so the owner is indemnified by insurers. There are like 30 insurers in the world who cover that sort of risk. They are extremely specialized insurers. There's in every insurance company that does that a specific entity with generally engineers, space engineers. And it's a very special market because essentially first of all, it's very technical. Secondly, it is not a type of market where the damage can be seen. You don't send an expert in orbit to see whether the satellite failed or not. It just relies on telemetry and good faith of the owner of the satellite. The major thing about this market is that it doesn't operate in accordance with the law of great numbers like any other insurance market. You know, like when an insurer insures 1 million cars, they can do statistics on how the risk actually emerges and how it can be covered, what is the cost of a premium, et cetera, et cetera. In space, there are like 10 to 15, maybe 20 launches a year and 200 satellites insured in orbit. That's not a lot of great numbers. So it's extremely volatile. The annual income of this market is in the order of $600 million, right? This is the amount of premium that comes into the insurers globally. In 23 and 24, the total amount of claims was well above $1.7 billion, right? That was the amount of claims. So a number of insurers just decided that this market is too volatile and they exited the market. They went away. So the capacity decreased there, and therefore the cost increased, and the requirements of insurers were more and more stringent about the quality of the satellites, etc. All this to say that it is a very volatile market. It is necessary, and regulations need to take that into account. One other important type of space insurance is third-party liability. And this covers damage suffered not by the owner of the satellite, but by third parties, like people who receive a piece of launch vehicle in their garden or in their house. Anyone who is not a participant in the space operation, including for in-orbit other space operators. Essentially, this market is ruled by the 1972 Convention on Liability, which makes the launching state absolutely liable for damage caused on the ground and liable for tort for damage caused in orbit. Now, the interesting thing is that there's never been a claim for in-orbit damage. So this market that has a roughly $7 million income per year, which is so small, has never seen a claim. And the claim could be, depending on the coverage that is required, but it goes generally in the orders of magnitude of $60 to $100 million. One single claim would wipe out several years of premium. And so that makes the market extremely volatile again. So in terms of space law and EU regulation, just the legislator must remember that insurance is necessary for outer space activities. I will say it shortly, no insurance, no space activities, because the operators will not run the risk of technical failure, and they would be exposed to such liabilities regarding third parties that it would be probably financially unbearable. Now, a couple of challenges ahead. There again, there's never been a claim arising out of a collision with a space debris identified as human-made. Very recently in 2023 and 24, Inmarsat 6F2 and Spainsat NG2 were totally destroyed by a microparticle. The claim amount was $300 and $400 million each satellite-ish. Was it a natural phenomenon or was it a debris? It was not decided. That it doesn't matter because there was an indemnification to the owners, but this will become obviously an upcoming issue in this market. And today it's very difficult to make a difference between a natural particle and a very, very small debris. A couple of additional issues that need to be considered in the legislation is identification of the responsible party, which means tracking of ownership, including identification of debris. The 1972 Convention on Liability was designed when space was a matter for governments, and now there are hundreds of private companies with very variable financial sustainability, which may disappear a couple of months after launch. So you have this, this one-use satellite at 10 centimeter by 10 centimeters that will be launched, and 3 months later, bang, the order is gone, and the satellite remains in orbit, uncontrollable. Who is responsible? The launching state. How does liability work in the case of combined operations when there are several satellites that operate together? Other question, who is the launching state in a European legislation? There is a paragraph in the draft law that addresses this, and it goes back to the launching state originally. I mean, the nation, not the European Union, but it's a question that will need to be considered, I believe, from a legal standpoint with more detail. And the other point is the definition of court in space operation. Court is not, I mean, there's never been a claim, again, in orbit, and a claim would be based on tort of the operator, right? If a country or the European Union generates a number of regulations, and this operator has not followed entirely the recommendations or the obligations arising out of this regulation, would they be in tort? It is a very legal question. I can't answer it, but it might be that, in fact, we're trying to generate a regulation to safeguard space and safeguard the European industry. And in fact, we're opening the a sort of weakness for the European players, because they would be very easily in tort in space because they do not abide with the regulation. Final point, I said this market is extremely volatile, so that at any time it may disappear or provide insufficient capacity to cover all of the space activity. Should there be a specific fund to cover the losses caused in space and supported by European players, and in particular for losses suffered by unidentified particles? That's it for me.
Thank you, Guya. From your insurance perspective, you raise completely new questions. Does anyone from the panelists like to react? No.
Has this issue been discussed at all in the drafting of the law, of the act?
Not really.
Yeah, maybe I can. I can try and say a few elements on it. I mean, first of all, I do confirm that it is not discussed explicitly in the frame of Space Act. Yet it is a crucial point on the way we discuss the Space Act. We say it at the very beginning. The Space Act is designed about safety, resilience, and sustainability, not about liability and insurance. And the very reason of that, I mean, you mentioned the 1972 treaty. The very reason of that is that liability for space activities remains primarily linked to member state responsibilities under the international space. So that's clearly linked to national authorization system. So that's why in many national space law, including the one recently introduced in Italy, insurance, those insurance requirements are treated together with licensing, liability, and possible recourse by the state against the operator. And there is another reason why it is not discussed at the EU level, is that this is an institutional reason. The EU itself is not party of the UN space treaties, while member states are. So it would be difficult for the EU members, for the EU Space Act to replace national liability and insurance regimes. So the current logic of the text is to harmonize liability, is to harmonize safety, resilience, and sustainability, not to harmonize liability or insurance. So that's one major point. But that said, the Space Act is of course not neutral for liability and insurance. As far as the regulation introduces common rules on collision avoidance, debris mitigation, resilience, and sustainability, this may influence how risks are assessed by operators, insurers, and national authorities, and that's another point, how to find the right balance between responsibilities. I mean, we introduce requirements at EU level, but it's member states at national level that takes the responsibility of it. That's not an easy balance, and we are struggling with that. And another delicate point associated to liability insurance is the free movement. I mean, everything is done in light of the possibility of space services to move freely in the common market, and that's Article 3 of the regulation. Free movement. So member states cannot restrict the provision of space services when they do comply with the regulation. But the point is that insurance are established at national level. So the question is how far insurance established at national levels may configure a barrier with respect to the regulation. So, I mean, you say that, I mean, you introduced a very complex point, complicated, I should say. It is not discussed as such as liability requirements, but it is discussed the impacts of the Space Act on the way at national level the liability issue is approached and regulated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Gave you also a good feedback and also assessment where to place it. Okay. One last question before we close. What new financial instruments are planned to support industrial scaling and prevent space startups from relocating outside Europe? One of the panelists like to react?
No, I can try hard since I mean I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but this is one of the points that is discussed, not specifically in the frame of the Space Act, but in the, let's say, larger discussion relating to the space vision and also to the space activities in the next MFF. And And that's as well somehow related to the previous question, how to support regional ecosystem and clusters. Okay, I will address very briefly this point. Just three ways the European space economy strategy can strengthen the role of regional ecosystem and aerospace. I think we should make any effort possible to improving access or to easy access to the EU programs and to the procurement opportunities. That's one point. Second, supporting innovation testing, and we are discussing how to test facilities, how to fund testing facility available to at national or regional level, and also helping clusters to connect better across borders and enter the European value chains. And I say that, Sir Roya, you do a great work in doing that. And for instance, there are some provisions of very specific to Copernicus we are discussing, where national delegation want to keep on some funding at national level that we have currently, and the Commission say, okay, but that may create fragmentation. So that there is an ongoing discussion, and I would say that member state delegation feel the need to better support territories. I'm not saying that the Commission does feel that need, but they try and look to preserve the overall picture. On the financial mechanism, I will mention Cassini, and of course I'm not here to talk on behalf of the Commission, but I should say that this has been a good tool, let's say good toolbox for supporting entrepreneurs, also with some financial mechanism. And what we are asking as a co-legislator, in this case as a national delegation, is to step up also in the way we are able to measure the results of applying those instruments. I think that the Commission and the European Investment Bank has done good in somehow distributing some capital, or make accessible capital in the space sector. We need to develop a methodology to measure how that action help to help the growth of the companies, such that we can be more effective. And that's also in the view that of the fact that Cassini appears now in a dedicated article of the ECF we are discussing at the same level of other space components, and this suggests a possible significant increase in political visibility and a dedicated budget. So I would address that way the question. Thanks.
Thank you, Salvatore. And Gennaro, I feel more and more we need also, as regional ecosystem, maybe get a position on give input to the idea of the Commission of a European space economy, and really highlight what are the needs of SMEs, of startups, of the companies in the sector when we build this European space economy. Before I close, I think now we have all the panelists. I have one more question. How do the first two speakers view the national security exemption? Of course, not harmonization right for the EU, but don't you fear that this will be a kind of super exemption which allows member states to circumvent of the requirements of the EU Space Act?
I can answer. Let's bear that in mind that space remains a member state's competence. Of course, we should limit exemptions and potential circumvention as much as possible, but we cannot deny that some safeguards must remain for member states. Let's recall, however, that even in case of a national security exemption, this doesn't mean that safety or resilience wouldn't be taken into account by member states.
Thank you. Salvatore, do you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you. I cannot agree more with Honorable Gori. I'm not sure I'll be able to be that synthetic to the point. There's a point, of course, we do debate in the council, and there is a legitimate concern. Let me say, let me start by saying that, but I would frame this issue slightly differently. I mean, national security exemption should not be understood as a way to escape the requirements on safety, resilience, and sustainability. I mean, the discussion is not about allowing member states to lower the level of protection or to create loopholes. The real issue, as Honorable Gori said, is how to apply those common EU requirements while respecting the specific nature of national security and defense activities. And it's clear that under the treaties, national security remains the responsibility of member states. And we said this, under international space law, member states remains responsible for authorizing and supervising their national space activities. So, I mean, exemption is not super exemption. It's meant to preserve national sovereignty. And I do agree, we need to avoid a situation where any activities is simply labeled as national security to bypass the regulation. But we need to avoid also the opposite risk, applying an internal market regulation in a way that interferes with defense, security, or sovereign missions. So that's not easy, and we are discussing. We are struggling, but we are discussing how to find the right balance between those two needs.
Thank you. I think, yeah, Guillaume,
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, the entire act is very much oriented towards safety, of course, and space traffic management, right? But the space is international by, or worldwide, global by nature. So the European Union is drafting the Space Act. Does it make sense? I mean, space, air traffic management, for example, this is done at worldwide level. Would it make sense that every country or every continent has their own air traffic management system? No, it wouldn't. Does it make sense that we may add another regulation at European level before we start trying to negotiate something at worldwide, at global level?
I agree in principle. I think that the Space Act must be seen as a step. I think that the European Union will leverage the Space Act for achieve more homogeneous regulation at the international level in the international forums.
Yeah, and I do agree. I mean, I can say that, only that I do agree. That's the point. There are some bricks on orbital traffic rules and collision avoidance in the Space Act. I wouldn't say that the Space Act tried to introduce a full-fledged space coordination system for the EU. The need is, I mean, that's not only related to the Space Act. Is also linked to a communication on the space traffic management of the Commission, where the Commission asked the member states to cooperate on the definition of an EU approach to space traffic management. There is a stakeholder consultation mechanism where this point of the space traffic management, of the approach of the EU to the space traffic management is discussed. So the point is that to find a common way to think to the space coordination, to the space traffic management at the EU level, such that when we discuss at global level, we have one voice and collectively we can be more effective and contribute better to discussion. That's the point. But again, this was again a very good point, a very good questions, because I mean, the main question is again is a question of balance, how to avoid to step ahead too much with respect to the maturity of I would say also technologies, but the global context in space traffic coordination. So.
Thank you, Salvatore. Then we came to the end. We had a rich discussion with numerous perspectives. My sincerest thanks to Member of European Parliament, Giorgio Gori, for joining. Salvatore Pinataro, we very much appreciated your insights, and to all the stakeholders. I think we could show a broad spectrum and a rich panorama of views. We will continue further on this topic and to work on the dossier. I think we plan for the next weeks a session with a strong focus on new space. How are companies, how's the new space sector impacted by the EU space package, and what are their views? But thank you for it. Were 2 intensive hours, and we really thank you for your inputs and your contribution and making this a very interesting event. Thank you, and we keep in touch.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you.
Very indeed.